Sup, everybody? This is Carrick with ACG. What is this? This is going to be a walking the walk video where I'm going to talk about open world game design and so forth. This is one that came out a while ago, but as we come closer to Horizon Zero Dawn on the PC, I wanted to release this again with some updates and some notes that have been in there because a lot of people do like this content. If you do like this content, I would love for you to share it, tweet it, post it wherever you can where good game discussion actually occurs. These do not do that well video style wise when it comes to numbers and views and things like that because it's not really normal for the channel, but it is something that I like to continue to do. If you like the video, I'd love for you to subscribe, maybe check out the Patreon. Let's begin. Now, remember, these videos aren't to sit here and wish it was on a different system because guess what? It's not. We're going to look at it. We're going to identify how it went about delivering the content in which it was attempting to deliver. In this case, an open world survival style action game. This footage is from a retail version, so it should appear exactly as you will be getting it. Let's do it. You know, I think when we first talk about Guerrilla Games, we talk about this game, we have to talk about the engine itself and some of the work that actually went into it. Now, this is the Decima engine. I think that's what it's called, Decima engine. And this was actually the engine that was used for Until Dawn and, of course, Killzone, the original release that came out for the PS4. And the team, they've been actually very open to just how unhappy they were with this engine when it came to open world. Now, you got to look at this from their standpoint, especially, and you have to understand they've discussed this as well, that they had to go in and tear out and alter a good deal of the underlying system's guts to sort of fit in these less structured scripted event systems and the way the game handles open world versus the more scripted occasional story events that you might get in a Killzone game. What I find highly interesting is this isn't the only title we've ever seen from a company that has decided to take an engine and sort of adjust it to a different genre, but it is certainly a fairly large change, even though we're looking at Killzone 2, which was pretty much a FPS, but it wasn't really open world so much. And then you go to Until Dawn, which was more of a cinematic title, and it certainly had some issues there with frame rate and so on. And then you have this, which is fully open world with alternate life systems, all kinds of different scripting and stuff that's been removed so it can be more dynamic. And you really are looking at a situation where whenever I talk to other developers and ask them, you know, what's one of your worst stories, you would be surprised how often one of their worst stories is using an engine for a game that they want the game to do something the engine cannot do. And the stress from the artists to the modelers to the actual lead devs to the producers, just how much stress something like that can cause. Because it's not like you have an engine and you're all, oh, it can't do one thing we want to do because then we can, you know, we might be able to figure a way around that or we adjust the gameplay. It's where when you want to take an engine you've got and you want to adjust it and alter it and core out its guts, and halfway through you're like, oh, damn, this may not actually work the way we want. And some companies don't do that. Some companies don't have the resources to do it. Guerrilla Games did. And I think that it's actually turned out quite well. This is a pretty good engine for open world now. Of course, we don't know what's actually going on underneath the engine, underneath the hood. One of the things I'd like to know is it a little bit like Red Dead Redemption, which, as if any of you guys who follow any of the history of some of the Rockstar stuff, we now know by multiple people who have left Rockstar, some who supposedly are still there, that really Red Dead Redemption behind the scenes from a technical level is always basically about to explode. And somehow to get that game released, they basically figured out a way to get it to work without dying. And that was one of the reasons why, one of the rumored reasons why we did not see a PC version. So it'll be very interesting to see what they do once they've got this done, what they do with this engine. And again, this engine is going to be used as well for Death Stranding. So we're going to see exactly how it works for that kind of situation as well. So it's a very interesting and unique solution, which is to use what you have that is on a different genre, core it out and create it and see if you can get it to work with what you are trying to do now. And I think they've come away with it pretty well. Now, this is 30 frames per second, as we know. And of course, it is a pseudo 4K. It is a checkerboard 4K, so it's not true native 4K. But whenever you hear that, most of the time you're going to hear it by people who are trying to make something sound worse. The fact is that it isn't native 4K, but what it is a higher resolution than, you know, your typical 1080p or 1440p. And so you still have an insanely good resolution. It's just not native 4K. It is a checkerboard version of 4K. So one of the things I have to say, talking a little bit about the engine, I absolutely have to talk about their weather systems. And of course, we're seeing that now with the wind and the rain. And I just have to bring it up because frankly, the weather system blows me away. If you know anything about programming and certainly about weather systems in games and certainly about scripting, you could script rain coming from a sky that was completely dry, right? I mean, that would make sense if you wanted it to make sense in your game world, which was magical, but it doesn't make sense to us naturally. You know, we expect to see our clouds. What they did for this game is they created a mathematical and basically a particulate generation system that they could draw into the game world and base it on real world science, and it would actually create rain. So the clouds you see in the sky, depending on how high they are, how low they are, if they're against the ground, if they're over warm or cool ground, will actually decide what weather comes out of them. Snow, sleet, frozen rain, normal rain, mist, fog. That is insane. That is very cool. It also allows for the developer and the artist to adjust things. Now, I actually find this highly interesting because as you guys have heard on some of the developer interviews I've had, depending on how long they've been in the industry or if they're a single developer, many times, developers used to be the artists, and then artists came in and the developers developed and the artist created the art. And then depending on how big a team is, you may have somebody overlapping, that kind of thing. What I thought was really interesting here is that this particular system, this weather system, is made in such a way that basically it sounds like pretty much anybody, including a producer, could basically sit down and go in and sort of adjust things to see what looked good and what they wanted to do with this cloud generation system. You can find a PDF paper about this where they covered it in their past GDC. It's absolutely fantastic, a really cool system. And I hope we see more of those things, because like I said prior, you can have rain without any clouds, those kind of things. But to see the game actually have rolling in clouds and see the particulate coming out of those clouds, whatever they've chosen because of the sciences that they've programmed into the system to actually come out at that time, whether it be snow or rain, is really a fantastic feeling because it actually feels like there's a distance in the game world. It feels like there's something happening in the future. And a lot of games don't have that. A lot of games don't handle it very well either, where you have a title where you're like, you know what? I just don't feel like I'm really seeing anything but whatever is reacting to me, right? It's only reacting to me. And it doesn't feel like it's a world. It doesn't feel like things are going on. When you have dynamic weather systems like this, what happens especially, we've seen this in Mad Max. I know a lot of people weren't in love with that game, but Mad Max's sandstorms. When you saw a far off sandstorm, you could watch that thing for, 30 or 45 seconds roll towards you. It was terrifying if you liked the game. If you didn't like the game, you could find it just completely stupid. But it was insane to see that rolling towards you. And that's what you get here. So really a phenomenal weather system. One of the things that I'm pretty excited about, actually, as you guys can tell, I think those kind of things really add to a feeling of realism for game players. And the more of that we have, the better. Another part of this, and I think we should just start talking about this right now, is that basically they're using a GPU-based procedural placement system. Now, this system is going to be talked about in the future GDC that's coming in a couple days, but I wanted to make sure that I prime this discussion just a tiny bit before jumping into it. One thing to remember is procedural placement. Procedural doesn't always mean No Man's Sky style of procedural generation. It is very important that people understand that procedural generation can take many forms and many different depth layers. It can be a completely unique situation that we haven't even seen before. So understanding how they're doing it and what they're doing is going to be vital. However, the little bits that they have let out are basically this. The system allows for them to adjust the game world. And by once again taking science and different program parameters that they've entered into the system into account, they are able to slightly adjust stuff. For example, if you have a destroyed road here going around a hill and they're like, you know what, we want a quest to happen right where that road curves. Can you basically make it go to the right and around the hill instead of the left and around the hill? They can do that. And what the system does, what this GPU-based procedural placement system does, is it goes in and due to the rules set aside where grass should be, where rocks should be, where trees should be, it actually then redraws the landscape to make basic sense. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, well, that's it, No Man's Sky. No, actually, because in this game, and this is a problem No Man's Sky had for quite a long time, in this game, this procedural generation system does allow them to to go in and adjust stuff by hand as well. It's just basically the underlying technology. It's almost like a map seed in a Minecraft game. And then of course you can make your own world on top of it. You can adjust everything if you have God mode on or whatever it's called. So there's various different ways in which procedural generation can work. I think that the GPU-based procedural generation they're talking about here is actually really interesting, and it's another tool. And of course, a tool used incorrectly can cause issues. But when you talk to any artists, developers, modelers, and you ask them for some of their horror stories, almost all of them have stories about a particular model, a particular texture, a particular location that they had to go to and iterate multiple times in a row. You know, it's sort of like saying, hey, Picasso, make 500 masterpieces. And each time he finishes one, you're like, yeah, I'd like that tree moved 1 foot to the left. When you think about it, sometimes familiarity can end up breeding a type of artistry contempt where you can't see it differently because you're seeing the same thing over and over and over again. And it's hard to really get your imagination stoked. What this allows is for developers, modelers, all of the designers to take that momentary step away and allow for the game world to start the basics, and that they can go in and then model it in the fashion that they want. And in fact, to be honest, spend the resources where they should be, which is delivering even more of what they had planned to the gamer and not spending it on a lot of that minutia. So when it comes to the procedural generation system, we'll know more about it in the future here, but I certainly think, personally, this is just me, I certainly think that the system that they have in place in no way, shape, or form should worry anybody that in a future game everything's just going to look the same. In fact, what we should see is artists being able to do what they want to do, especially when it comes to landscape artists, and that's create interesting landscapes by putting stuff on top of things. It's almost like you wouldn't expect the artist to end up making his own stone block so that he can then sculpt it down. Instead, basically you have it where the stone block is delivered to their home and they can continue work. So very cool systems. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they talk about when they continue to talk about this at GDC. Now, when it comes to the engine, I want to talk a little bit about how it displays and how it shows its game world and just how interesting this game world actually is. Now, it may not be up to Witcher 3 quality, but I think Witcher 3 is a very unique title. I certainly don't think that most people expect every title to be Witcher 3, and I don't think many people will expect every title to be Horizon Zero Dawn. But when we look at these titles, we do end up drawing some comparisons between all of them. And one of the comparisons I want to talk about when it comes to world design, when it comes to just the overall way in which the game is brought forth and you see it, is the sheer size of it, one, and then the verticality, two. So the size of it is pretty incredible. Now, it is not near the size of Witcher 3, okay? So everybody needs to understand, it's not. It's not the size of Witcher 3, nor was it ever in any way, shape, or form supposed to be. One of the things a lot of people forget is what something is supposed to be. Because a lot of people think that if there's a bullet point on one game, all games should have said bullet point. One of the things I like about how Guerrilla Games handled this is they were just basically gave everybody a middle finger and said, no, that makes absolutely no sense. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure if we have a bullet point in there, if we have something that we want to do it well, instead of just having them randomly in there. And I think that we see some strengths from that kind of core building principle as we move forward and talk about it. So I think now's a good time to talk a little bit about sound, music, and voice. Let's just listen to the environmental sounds here.
Should be out there fighting machines, not pacing around here.
A little bit about sound. One of the first things you probably noticed, it's a little bit harder to notice here because of the accuracy, but basically you do have different sounds left and right for the boot. So if the left boot's on mud, the right boot is on stone, you actually hear the different sounds there, which doesn't always occur in some games. But it would surprise you just how often there is a generic sound that plays, and there is little to no variation on those depending on what they hit when it comes to terrain. So you notice that. You also notice that there's a distinct amount of layering. Now you still have that soft undercurrent, that soft blanket of sound, especially in this location where you have multiple waterfalls and you are in an area where sound would filtered up in an echoey style. Okay, you would have a slightly altered tonal resonance in this location regardless anyway. But what you notice here is not only is it just really rich and thick in variation, but it also has the ability to sort of make sure that you're hearing something without always having to hear music. Now, I've talked about music, not being intrusive, but being interesting, not being just interesting, but sometimes being actually a little invasive in some titles. Here, you have a situation where maybe the composer was a little nervous, a little shy, because you don't hear it as much as I really expect. But when you do, you have this really thick tonal layer that's already occurring, this incredibly rich amount of variation that's occurring in your different layers for your soundscape, regardless of where you are. And then you add in that music. And I have to say, the idea of only doing that at particular times really does add a poignant feeling to those particular moments. It's like, okay, Michael Bay moment. Now, I'm joking about the Michael Bay, but you sort of get my opinion. It's one of those situations where when it does occur, you sit up and go, something big is happening right now. And I love that. Also for me, just talking a little bit about voice, I've always believed that, especially in games like this, the advent of being able to put voice into titles it's something that is such a strong tool. It's such a really excellent tool for giving characters world building information, giving players world build information without actually requiring them to go do a quest for it or requiring anything other than the engagement of just actually being in whatever location where that's playing. It's one of the things that I complain about sometimes when you go into a game and you're playing and you're inside of a town and there's only a couple people there, but they're all talking via text, right? They're not actually using spoken word. And so what happens is sometimes it's hard to actually find those little bits of data, or other times you have to go distinctly to every single one. And what you end up doing is you do what I sort of call plot pulling. Plot pulling is where you basically start talking to people and you're pulling plot from them like little tiny containers. And it's almost like a strange, really easy to win roulette system where you're just, I need to pick this number and pick this number so that I can get this one little bit of a plot point. Now, that doesn't mean that this game doesn't do that, but what it does and what games of the open world that I like, what they do, one particular design, is that they give side information in various ways. Everything from momentary musical interludes that we get in this game that indicate when an enemy is not following you anymore, to bits of music when you are getting near a bunker in this game, to hearing characters talking in the city about particular elements of the game world itself and particular plot points that either you are coming into or are currently engaging in. Connected to that, especially when you understand about development, you can read about Noah Berry, for instance, who was involved in Skyrim and Fallout 3, I believe, and his excellent use of just identifying what really tells a player what's occurring in the game, whether it be excellent color and theme use, which I'll discuss in a bit, or it be the way he put particular bits of geometry in particular areas, particular trees in particular areas to keep a character going a particular way or to draw their eyes to something. Well, the same thing can be said for audio cues like this. They can be situations where you're going one way and you hear, something off the side and you sort of pick up on it. It's funny because there's a lot of world building in this game that's done this way. For example, really when you look at the way the world is designed and you look at the way this entire thing is playing out, it really is a typical Gaia versus technology, nature versus technology, Mother Earth versus technology kind of situation here. And there's this cool feeling at the same time, though, that whatever is powerful is worshipped, which is, I think many of us would assume is somewhat of a typical, native style belief, a belief, especially in this kind of game world where you're not 100% sure exactly what's real and what's not. And you pick up on these because as you're walking, you might have a character who will say something about your armor, and there can be racial tones about the armor. For example, they'll say things about how you look in a particular set of armor if you're in a town that is not friendly with the armor set that you're actually wearing with that particular type of armor. Or you'll hear something about the machines that you've killed if you're wearing armor that has a lot of pieces of those machines. And what you have is you have this intertwining of the various elements of the game, and that is how game building and world building actually occurs, is that intertwining. And a lot of people think, it's just graphics, it's just gameplay. You could say that, but to me, it's all of those elements combined because they can all be vital and useful tools for getting information to the player and making the player able to pick up on things. For example, just walking through the city, you hear people talking about you yourself, you hear people talking about how you were an outcast and all of these different elements, but you can hear them in both present and past tone depending on when you go to particular places. And so that's also a continuing on of the story. And a lot of people look at these and go, these are just audio bits. There's nothing really useful in them. Well, I can tell you right now, multiple times in this game, multiple times in many of the better open world titles, there are moments of, a small vocal quip from an NPC or something somebody says that isn't in a main plot area that has given me an idea on what to do. All right, so we'll jump into another place and we'll talk just a moment about world building and how world building comes about in this particular title and some of the things that I personally think they did a great job with. There's a lot of elements that Guerrilla Games have sort of picked up from, I think, some luminaries like, let's say, Zelda Wind Waker and so forth. And one of the things that you can really pick up on that's the same with a lot of these titles, especially that I like in the open world genre, is when there's something mysterious, something unknown that you can see far off that draws you towards it, right? Now, in a way, a little bit, it's sort of like the audio cues where something is said and that interests you and draws you towards it. But here I'm talking in particular about things you may see in the far distance. And that's one of the things that I think Guerrilla Games did a really good job with. When you look at this game world, aside from the fact that you have different, ecosystems and they all look particularly different from one another, the fact is it is all a particular terrain you're accustomed to. But when you see particular things that are unique here, for example, if you see the entrance to a cauldron, which is the underground dungeons, they look distinctly different. And that mysterious bit that you see far off draws you, the player, towards it. Just exactly like what I was saying about what Noah Berry was discussing about Skyrim and Fallout, and the use of something to draw a player towards an actual area. And then as you draw them towards an area, you also design elements within the game that fit within that area. One of the things I noticed when I was playing this title is when you look at any one game, usually, especially with open world titles, there's parallel gameplay lines that are always continuing. Okay, so you have your main line quests, and these are your quests 1, 2, 3, 4, chapter breaks, and they get you to the end of the game. And then you have the side quests, which is parallel to, they're beside, maybe interconnected at times, but they're to the side of the main quest and shorter and longer and sort of look a little bit like Morse code dashes because they continue for a bit and then stop and then continue for a bit and stop. And then you have other side, I guess you would call it fluff. You have those things that some people like to do in particular games, like go and collect feathers and so forth. It just all depends on what you like or don't like. And what you notice here is a far more organic feeling of stretching the game player to look at these mysterious items like Zelda Wind Waker or something like that, where you see something in the far off distance, then actually telling you to go there. I noticed it in drawings, in pictograms. I noticed it in just seeing a different animal I hadn't seen before. I noticed it in the different audio cues I might have got from an NPC in a town who asked somebody else if they had seen this weird rock somewhere. Those are the kinds of things that caused me to be more interested. And even though when you look at those parallel gameplay lines, you look at the main line and you do have those side quests are still connected for the most part to the actual main game. So while a couple aren't, most of them in some way are, because your character is either known by the people that you're doing the quest for, or you will become known as you do the quest, one of the two. And so what ends up happening is this very cool feeling of a far more organic exploration experience where you just decide to go somewhere and the game isn't forcing you or asking you like a Skyrim where it's just like, oh, we've searched, we found you haven't gone to this place, we're going to create a random quest to send you there. And I think that's funny because technically it's also Todd Howard who's such a big believer in downtime and a big believer in those moments of exploration and looking around, which funny enough is far more organic in this title than in others. It's more about the game just allowing me to versus a big forcing of. In fact, they even do little vocal cues to make you understand that it's not necessarily like other role-playing games or other action role-playing games. Let me give you an example. There'll be times where in any game we've ever played where they're like, I need you to go here right now. Somebody's dying of some horrible disease. And you're like, okay, no problem. You show up 60 months later with the potion that they needed and the person somehow clung to life that entire time. They're like, thanks. The only game I've ever seen tease that was Divine Divinity, or Divinity Original Sin. I'm sorry, the newest one. What's funny that happens in this game is that they actually have little tiny vocal cues that indicate to you that they won't be there right away. Now, is that true? No, because you could, if you wanted, quick travel and the person would be there. But there's little vocal cues that make you believe that they have to travel there. And they will say it almost every time somebody's going to meet you. They'll say something along the lines of, well, I've got to gather my friends, or I've got to gather my army, or I've got to do this and do that, but I will meet you there. And there's this feeling of action prior to the meeting that is a very, very intelligent way to get gamers to sort of disconnect from that little bit of narrative dissonance that we have in so many titles. So I said I was actually going to talk about color work for a bit, and I am so impressed with the color work in this title, whether it be right here where you can see the difference between, let's say, a neutral and an aggressive creature, all the way to their weak spots, to just the actual clothes that the main character and other characters wear. There is a very cool connection between the technological colors and the actual tribal colors that your main character wears, one being muted and one being an electronic glow. And there's this connection, and you could say it's foreshadowing, whatever you may want to, but I personally believe it's just a really good idea of color use and getting things to match up and feel real within the game world. And we see that as we look at here, even the color, you can see the changes that go on those creatures as they turn from blue to red to indicate an aggressive stance or an aggressive demeanor. And so I'll jump in here and I'll try to go to a cauldron so you can see what a little bit of the cauldron looks like, because the color work there is quite spectacular, and there's a dichotomy that you notice as you're playing. For example, as you're traveling the land, everything is lush and green, verdant there. It doesn't matter if it's snowy, there's always something going on. It's very organic, and that feeling that the mystery and the scariness and of the machines and all of that kind of thing is still there, but it's certainly something that you can possibly find some safety from. And nature is, while it's being invaded or has been invaded by the machines, it's still ultimately in unbelievable power if you just look at the way everything is. I mean, it's obviously they haven't taken over or built new buildings or anything crazy like that. But when you go into the cauldrons, then it's the reverse, and you see just little bits of nature that have sort of busted in, and you might see like mushrooms or stalactites or stalagmites in a particular room, some snow that's fallen in, and it's this cool feeling. It's like the machines have crept up out of the earth and they are sort of on the actual earth itself, but beneath the ground in these cauldrons, the exact opposite has happened, and nature has sort of taken those back, or attempted or started to take those back. And it's like this tit for tat. It's like this teeter-totter of technology versus nature that continues throughout the entire title. And I like the fact that it continues within the actual color work. So now I want to talk a little bit about just the way the culture and the characters are built. So I want you guys to listen to something and sort of look around for a moment. So the first thing I think I noticed, especially when I was doing the festival and doing a couple other bits within the major villages, is you start to pick up on that there's probably 4 to 5 different cultures that are being represented here if you look closely. And it's just sort of like this hodgepodge, futuristic, druidic style religion that you might actually have after an apocalypse that didn't really pick racially who was going to live. You have like Native American, you have some Asian, you have some Viking, and other elements that you actually notice in the game. In some ways, this is actually the moment where the game actually reminded me of Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome and the kids who had grown up near the airplane wreck and their sort of warped idea of traditions and history. And you have that world building starting right here, and it continues on. You get that world building not only from the locations and not only from the way in which everything is sort of designed, but even if you look closely, you can start to see things like wires and different items that are mechanical that are used as decoration, for example, on his cloak. And you continually get that feeling once again of that the powerful and mysterious is in some way slightly worshipped here. So it's sort of a weird negative kind of feedback that's going on where the machines are not trusted, they're killed, but you sort of have people wearing their stuff, and in some ways, especially in some side quests and stuff, you can pick up the fact that technically they might actually, or at least some of them might actually be worshiping them, or at least feel like they should be. And one of the reasons why I like this, and it's not even really a plot point, it's just something that I noticed as I played, you can get skills, and this is one of the things that I love about the system and how it's all put together. You can get skills that directly play into sort of this culture clash, because some of the skills let you actually knock off particular parts, particular extra parts from the creatures that are useful for creating armor or creating different items. And it's this feeling of like, oh, I smashed a robot dinosaur to shit and somehow I found a working generator in its head. You don't have that. Instead, It's about smashing them with these special attacks that basically break those elements off and structures off, and then you can build them. And I love that culture clash of like, we hate them, but we love them and we're wearing their stuff. And, it is that typical discussion of, oh, hey, it's, armor that would protect us from them, so it only makes sense that we do it. That's true, but when you look at the way some of the other characters do things within the game world, and you certainly look at the cultures, you can actually pick up that there was an undercurrent, at least on purpose, a small one, of the writers to indicate that, not everybody was for or against here. And I think when you look at these kind of game worlds and you look at these kind of cultures, it makes sense to have a bit of a gray area. And I like that fact because technically your character is the gray area. That's sort of how you play it. And you'll find this as you play it, but basically that's really how it and what it comes down to. And so the fact that the game world may appear at first to be pretty black and white, and it certainly does, especially when they start giving you the ideas of their myths and traditions and ideologies. What happens is, as you continue to play, you start picking up that possibly some people aren't exactly as black and white as they pretend to be. Now, people have asked me if it feels odd that you have these menacing machines that are out in the middle of forested roads and different prairies, and then you also have the fact that basically they can chew up a human in 0.2 seconds. And does it feel like there's a dichotomy there? And certainly does it feel odd that she's out there reprogramming or hacking things with her staff? And, when it comes down to it, I think personally that a lot of this is explained within the culture, the traditions, the myths. I can't get too far into it, but I'm actually not at all upset with that. I think for a game story, that makes sense and it works here. Now, when talking about the culture, you really do have to look at the creature design. So let's discuss that for a second. So we do know that there's about 25 creatures that they made for this. Now, this is some interesting stuff. Originally, it was not actually dinosaurs, and technically it's not right now, but I'll discuss that in a second. It was actually more like robotic versions of spiders and everyday creatures like scorpions. Here's what's weird. The gameplay didn't work. It was actually too difficult for players to hit the legs and hit the weak spots of these creatures, and so it became sort of a body shot central kind of game where nobody was really taking those extra chances because the legs were so spindly and it was just difficult to target into. So they actually adjusted and attempted multiple different designs until they basically came up with a somewhat large dinosaur style feel. But they decided they did not want to go with exact dinosaurs. And one of the reasons why I like that, and in addition, one of the reasons why I think we noticed problems with the human AI is because they did not want it so that we saw Tyrannosaurus Rex and we were like, okay, we know exactly what it's going to do and so forth. It just may have a laser on its head, but it's going to be basically a transformer and we're going to know exactly how to take it down. And so what they did was they made hybrids so that there was no real one-for-one comparison. And that was a design element also to keep the alien feeling real and alive and keep the player constantly looking for the next new creature and the next new mystery and keep that loop of discovery and mystery open for us, because that actually helps. And when you look at the AI for the creatures, before we discuss the problem with the human AI, when you look at the AI for the creatures, it's very easy to accept slightly odd AI in a creature in a game. One of the reasons why is whenever you fight a bipedal creature in a game, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, you hope, they usually react in somewhat normal ways. And there's particular things that we ourselves have grown up with that makes total sense, and we understand it, and we can move past that, and we can kill or run away from that enemy. But what happens here is you're facing off against creatures that not only look somewhat like dinosaurs, but they also have lasers and they may react in completely different ways. And so you're not 100% sure sometimes when they leap past you and they go behind a rock if they're actually doing some different parameter of their AI or if they're actually encountering a bug. Now, of course, you'll occasionally see a bug where like something just gets stuck on a tree. I'm not talking about that because that isn't always the type of bugs that we actually encounter. It's just the ones that we may notice distinctly. So many times it's easier, despite all of the reasoning that we have, to sort of accept that a creature, a hybrid, may do something crazy when it comes to their AI. Here's the problem with the human AI in this game, and it's something that I've talked about quite a bit, especially on the podcast, but I talked about it in the review. So the human AI is basically an incredibly good example of how the middle ground anywhere can kill you. Let me describe that. When they are far away and they are deciding to pick between a bow and arrow and up close sword, when they hit you with bow and arrow, I can tell you, even on the easier difficulties, if you don't watch what you're doing, they are pretty dead-eye dick, and they can hit you in a couple crossfires, and it won't take long for them to kill you. And that's even on an easy difficulty. And that's if they step back and if they have bows and they're archers and they start shooting at you. They can do fairly well. If they are up super close, same thing. They're pretty good swordsmen. It doesn't mean they're perfect, but they're pretty good. And you, of course, have your own skills. But I'm just saying that they can do some wicked damage if you're not watching out what you're doing. But here's what's weird. In the middle ground, they absolutely suck. And I think I know why. And I'm going to give you my example, my opinion of why. First of all, let me describe what they do. When they are far away, they're fine. When they're close, they're somewhat fine. I would say both are somewhat fine. When they're in the middle ground, many times what'll happen is you'll be firing your arrows and a bad guy will actually run away from you straight back. So he'll basically back up 10 feet and then run towards you 10 feet and shoot. And then back up 10 feet and run towards you 10 feet and shoot. And he'll repeat this multiple times. Now, usually what this indicates, and I'm not saying it's for sure indicating this, but usually what it indicates is that the AI loop that was written for that creature during battles, or written for, in particular, these people during battles, is not actually checking for success and is certainly not checking for any kind of extended time down or extended, time where this isn't working. It's basically just repeating one. It's like, they're this far away, they're doing this, I'm going to do this. They're this far away, I'm doing this. They're this far away, I'm doing this. And what should be happening is there should be a check to verify success, and there should be communication with other AI to indicate if success has occurred. And if it hasn't, then what you do is you switch that AI to a different state. You switch that AI to a state of retreat, to a state of movement, to a state of re-aiming where they go somewhere else, to a state of weapon switching. Those kind of things are pretty vital. And for some reason, and we already know that the developers are looking at this, for some reason we don't see that in this game. We do definitely see some issues in the middle ground in this game, and some oddities with, let's say, whistling and so forth, which is, I think, one of the most overpowered skills in any games ever. Anytime there's a whistle skill in a game, I almost always know it would be overpowered. If whistling was that fucking easy, I would rule the world. So it's just so crazy that you can whistle and create a conga line of death in almost every video game where there is some kind of whistle to get somebody's attention. Same thing can be done with rocks in this game as well. So I think that that's what we're seeing with the AI. Now, when it comes to the AI itself, how does it work? Well, one of the things that I liked about it is, because it is unscripted, because it's dynamic across different layers, you do get that, pulling that can happen almost like in an MMO where you kite somebody, and you can get this situation where you're taking out a defended enemy base, which is what I was doing, a bandit base. And as I was fighting, all of a sudden I was attacked by like friggin' 3 massive robots I had not even seen. I don't know how they saw me. I had backed away too far and triggered one of them to see me, and they came to attack me. Now, I like that. I actually think that's great, because what it does is, and what very few games of this kind do, is it really taught me I needed to know exactly where I was. Now, I'm not saying no games do this, because we've even seen it in Skyrim Oblivion. They would do that. So it's not like no games have done that. It's just that I felt that the way that the enemies were here with their, laser guns and their leaping stomps and the way you can move and dodge, it's not something you want to do without some proper thought. You don't want to jump in there without some proper thought. So I really did like that setup and how they handled it. And I like that ability to have these dynamic battles that are much more dangerous for me than they would be if that wasn't possible, or if they turned down hostility and creatures that weren't actually in the current fight that's occurring. So I also love the way that they've set up the enemies. So for example, most of the time, almost no enemy is alone. Now, we've seen this before in other games where you come up and there's like one guard that you can just take down easy and then take down whoever he's guarding. But as you see here with the bird dude protecting this horse guy or giraffe dude, you basically have different ways in which you can take him out. But many of those ways will be loud enough that other characters and other NPCs and other enemies in this game will actually sense. And I love the fact that every time I came up on a group, it didn't matter if the group was docile or not, almost every single time there were guardians with them. And it gave me that feeling of, this machine intelligence is at least a little bit smart, right? It's not like letting humans build their fortresses with their giant torches and their campfires and pretending they don't exist. Instead, it's actually got some intelligent design, which is to make sure that whatever resource gathering one creature is doing, it has a protector to protect it during that resource gathering at the same time. And that just really works. It just works. I liked the way it felt. And I think that when it comes down to it, it adds a little bit to that world building. And I want you guys to hear something right now. I just wanted you guys to hear that corrupted, almost Morse code sound as they were searching for me and communicating with one another. And I really like that. You know, we see it in a lot of games where NPCs won't talk at all. And then sometimes you'll see a game where maybe you'll hear the NPC say, you know, he's here, I see him here, those kind of things. They actually do it with the creatures as well. And that was actually quite surprising. It wasn't something I expected, as you can obviously tell right here, because this was actually calling in reinforcements that killed me. So that's pretty much it for me. You know, there's a lot within this title that's more of an open-ended style of open world game, which is more about showing you interesting places and having you sort of go there in your own time frame, the time frame that you want. And even though the story at later times does have some speed requirements to it where it's like you need to go here now, that's fine. Overall, it's not actually like that. And it does have a slightly subdued nature that actually ties in quite well with the way the game sort of doles out things like mysteries and doles out new places and new creatures. And it all sort of works together very organically. And I think that that's one of the things that when you hear people talking about it and they, you know, mention that they have a problem here or there, but they can't really tell you why they like it. Most likely, the people I've talked to who've played this, they all agree that that's actually the reason, that there's a very organic feel to it, and the leashing of a lot of that open world fluff makes it so much easier to engage in. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.